I trusted my brother with everything. And he used it to destroy my life completely. It was the reading of my father's will, the moment I thought would bring closure after his passing. Instead, it brought betrayal so deep, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My name is Isabella Carter. I'm 34 years old, an architect living in Boston, and for most of my life, I believed my parents loved me just as much as they loved my younger brother, Ethan. We didn't always get along, but I thought blood meant something. I thought family meant fairness. God, how naive I was. That morning, I walked into the mahogany-paneled office of my father's lawyer, heart heavy but hopeful. My father had been strict but proud of my achievements. I'd spent years working myself to exhaustion, double shifts, night classes, saving every penny, while Ethan floated from one failed business idea to the next. Still, I assumed the will would reflect balance. Dad had always preached about fairness. At least, in words. Ethan was already there when I arrived, lounging in one of the leather chairs like he owned the place. His smile was just a little too wide, his suit a little too expensive for someone who hadn't worked a steady job in years. "Nice of you to show up, Izzy," he said, his tone dripping with fake warmth. I forced a smile back, ignoring the jab. Beside him sat my mother, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face unreadable. But her eyes flicked toward Ethan, then away from me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of unease. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. Line after line, my father's voice seemed to echo in that room through the lawyer's words, until we reached the part about the inheritance. And that's when the world tilted. To my beloved son, Ethan Carter, I leave the family estate, all financial accounts, and business shares. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. But no. My father had left everything to Ethan. Not half. Not even a token gesture for me. Nothing. My breath caught in my throat. "What? About me?" I asked, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. The lawyer hesitated, flipping to the next page. "To my daughter, Isabella Carter, I leave my personal watch collection, for sentimental reasons. A handful of watches. That was it." Ethan leaned back, a smug smile tugging at his lips. My mother still wouldn't meet my eyes. My heart pounded in my ears, heat flooding my face. Years of sacrifices, skipping vacations to help with the mortgage, paying off Ethan's debts more times than I could count, and this was my reward? I wanted to scream. To demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, gripping the armrests until my knuckles turned white. The meeting ended quickly after that. Ethan was already on his phone, probably calling one of his shady friends to brag. My mother murmured something about your father's wishes before following him out, leaving me alone in that suffocating office. But here's the thing, grief has a strange way of sharpening your senses. As I gathered my things, my eyes landed on a folder the lawyer had set aside. It wasn't part of the reading. Just an unmarked envelope, thick with papers. And for some reason, my gut told me it mattered. The envelope wouldn't leave my mind. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table, the city lights flickering through the window, replaying the scene over and over in my head. Ethan's smirk. My mother's silence. The lawyer's carefully neutral face. And that envelope, thick, heavy, and very deliberately set aside. I told myself I was being paranoid. That it was probably just extra paperwork. But deep down, a knot of suspicion had already taken root. A few days later, I decided to accidentally stop by the lawyer's office. I brought coffee, played the grieving daughter card, and asked if I could get copies of all documents related to my father's estate. He hesitated for a moment too long before nodding. That hesitation told me everything. There was something he didn't want me to see. When the copies finally came through, the envelope was gone. But I noticed gaps in the timeline of the paperwork. Missing dates. References to Appendix B and Clause 14 that weren't included in the set he'd given me. My father had been meticulous, he wouldn't have left something so incomplete unless someone had taken it out. Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior grew bolder. Within a week, he moved into the family estate like a conquering king. I drove past one night and saw new luxury cars in the driveway, loud music spilling from the open windows. The place that had been our childhood home now looked like a nightclub. Then came the calls. Our father's business partners, men I'd met countless times, began reaching out to me in confusion. Ethan's demanding access to the design files, one said. He says you authorized it. Another accused me of canceling a renovation project I'd been working on for months. I hadn't done any of it. But I could see the pattern forming. Ethan was trying to smear me, to make me look incompetent so no one would question why I'd been left with nothing. When I confronted him over the phone, his voice was sickeningly casual. Relax, Izzy. I'm just taking care of things now. Dad trusted me to handle the real work. He said real work like my years of building a career meant nothing. I wanted to hang up. Instead, I asked the question burning in my chest. Did you know about Dad's will before he died? Silence. Just for a beat, but long enough. Then he laughed. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Doesn't matter now, does it? And he hung up. From that moment, my unease shifted into something darker. Determination. But the turning point came a week later at a family dinner my mother insisted I attend. The tension was thick from the moment I walked in. My mother barely spoke to me, and Ethan treated me like I was a guest in my own family. At one point, as I reached for the bread, I caught Ethan watching me with this glint in his eye, the kind of look that says I've already won. And that's when my mother said it. We all have to accept your father's decision, Isabella. It's time to move on. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't ready to move on, not without answers. But I bit my tongue. Because right then, in that suffocating dining room, I realized something important. If I was going to uncover the truth, I couldn't let them see me coming. The plan was simple: watch, wait, and collect. I stopped confronting Ethan directly. Stopped bringing up the will with my mother. On the surface, I looked like I'd accepted my sentimental inheritance of dusty watches. But underneath, every nerve in me was electric, scanning for cracks in their perfect little story. It didn't take long. One afternoon, I got a call from an old college friend, Daniel, who worked in real estate law. Izzy, did you know the Carter estate changed ownership 3 weeks before your dad died? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. 3 weeks before his death. My father had been in the hospital, barely conscious. Who signed the transfer? I asked. Daniel hesitated. It's Ethan. And your mother. Power of attorney papers, too. Power of attorney. That meant they'd been making legal decisions on my father's behalf, while he was too sick to even speak for himself. I felt my blood run cold. But the deeper I dug, the worse it got. Bank statements showed massive withdrawals from my father's accounts in the final month of his life. Properties quietly sold. Investments cashed out. And all of it funneled straight into Ethan's name. Still, none of this explained why my father had cut me out entirely. Unless he hadn't. That's when the missing Appendix B came back to haunt me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The page numbers in the will skipped over it, like a chapter ripped out of a book. And then, one night, Daniel called again. I think I found something. Your father's original will from last year. It's very different. I met him at his office after hours. Under the flicker of fluorescent lights, he slid a folder across the desk. My hands shook as I opened it. In that version, my father had split everything equally between Ethan and me. Equal shares of the estate, the accounts, even his business assets. The watches weren't even mentioned, they were just a footnote. The signature was his. The date was clear. This wasn't a draft, it was the real thing. And suddenly, it clicked. The version read in the lawyer's office wasn't my father's will at all. It was a replacement. A forgery, pushed through while he was too sick to object. I felt my stomach twist, a mix of grief, fury, and something I couldn't name. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd stolen my father's last say in what happened to the family he'd built. I wanted to march straight to my mother's house and throw the papers in her face. But then I remembered the look in Ethan's eyes at that dinner, that smug certainty that I'd never touch what he'd taken. That was when my anger turned into precision. I wasn't just going to get my share back. I was going to make sure they regretted every step of what they'd done. And as fate would have it, Ethan gave me my first weapon himself. 2 days later, I got a bank notification, not for my account, but for one I'd closed years ago. Somehow, a transfer had gone through. And the sender's name was right there in black and white. Ethan. The bank notification was like a loaded gun left on my doorstep. Ethan had transferred $15,000 into an account under my name, an account I hadn't touched in over 6 years. On the surface, it looked like a gift. But I knew my brother well enough to recognize the setup. If the law came sniffing around his finances, he could claim I'd been involved. I wasn't angry. I was ecstatic. Because that transfer meant one thing: he'd left a paper trail. I called Daniel and laid it all out: the forged will, the suspicious transfers, the missing appendix, and now this tidy little breadcrumb Ethan had just handed me. Daniel listened quietly, then said the words I'd been waiting for. "If you want to take him down, we'll need more. And we'll need to catch him in front of witnesses." Perfect. The next 2 weeks, I played the role of the dutiful, defeated sister. I even attended one of Ethan's obnoxious housewarming parties at the estate. He strutted around in a tailored suit, showing off our father's antiques like he'd earned them. But while everyone else sipped champagne, I was quietly slipping a small recording device into the drawer of his study desk. It didn't take long for it to pay off. 3 days later, I had it, Ethan on tape bragging to one of his drinking buddies about getting Mom to sign the papers while the old man was half dead, and laughing about how I was too soft to ever do anything about it. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted my audience. So I invited my mother, Ethan, and a handful of our father's closest friends for what I called a family reconciliation dinner at my apartment. My mother seemed relieved. Ethan, arrogant as ever, showed up late and made a show of hugging me like nothing had ever happened. We ate in brittle politeness until dessert. That's when I pushed my chair back, picked up my laptop, and said, "There's something I need to show everyone." The first thing on the screen was my father's original will, the equal split version, signed and dated. Gasps rippled around the table. Ethan's smile faltered, but he stayed silent. Then I hit play on the audio. His voice filled the room, every vile word crystal clear. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Our father's friend stared at him like he'd turned into a stranger. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Ethan's face had gone pale, his jaw tight. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "Oh, it changes everything. The bank transfers. The forged will. Power of attorney fraud. You didn't just steal from me, Ethan. You broke the law. And now, everyone knows it." For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "Ethan. Tell me this isn't true." He opened his mouth, but no words came. That was the moment I knew I'd won. Not just the battle for the inheritance, the war for my father's legacy. And as Ethan stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I allowed myself the smallest, sharpest smile. He thought he'd buried me. Instead, he handed me the shovel. The fallout was brutal. and glorious. Within a week, Daniel had filed the paperwork to contest the will, armed with the original document, the bank records, and that damning audio. The court didn't take long to act. The estate was frozen, Ethan's access to all accounts cut off overnight. His shiny new cars? Repossessed. The housewarming mansion? Locked under legal hold. My mother, to her credit, tried to reach me. She called twice, left messages about how we're still family and Ethan just made mistakes. I didn't call back. Not because I hated her, but because I finally understood something: people who stand by while someone destroys you aren't neutral. They're part of the destruction. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't bother with apologies. I heard through mutual contacts that he'd gone from bragging about his business empire to begging old acquaintances for money. One even told me he'd tried selling some of my father's antiques, and got caught, because they were now evidence in a pending fraud case. The legal process dragged on for months, but in the end, the court restored the original will. Half of the estate came to me, exactly as my father had intended. The rest remained Ethan's, though by then most of it had been swallowed by legal fees and debts he'd racked up during his short reign as king. When the day came to finally walk through the family estate again, it didn't feel like victory in the way I'd imagined. The place was quiet, stripped of Ethan's gaudy excess. My father's study still smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat in his old leather chair, running my fingers over the desk where I'd done homework as a teenager, and let myself breathe. For the first time in years, there was no knot in my chest. No constant second-guessing. Just peace. I kept the watches, by the way. Not because I cared about them as items, but because I wanted a reminder. A reminder that sentiment without action means nothing. People sometimes ask me if I regret going after Ethan, if I wish I'd just let it go for the sake of family. My answer is always the same: family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty. And loyalty without honesty is just a prettier form of betrayal. Ethan taught me that. And to be honest, I should probably thank him. Not for the money, not for the estate, but for finally showing me who my real allies are. So if Ethan's watching this, here's my message: thanks for teaching me the value of a good lawyer. And a better memory. Subscribe to True Moments Life and share your story in the comments.